Part 2, Music Industry Changes and Conflict. A Manousso Musing with Hank Moore, Business Guru. Part of the series, Titans of Mediation, with seasoned mediator trainer, Dr. Barbara Sundaram Manousso. Now that is our topic for today. Welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International Show and Podcast by InstantMediations.com, where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Catch regular episodes on YouTube, the Instant Mediations app, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Just remember, nothing in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so be sure to talk to a lawyer, as cases are fact-dependent. Hey everyone, this is Mac Louis, attorney, mediator, arbitrator, working throughout Florida and Texas.
And Natalia Łuskaczajka, advocate, mediator, and arbitrator from Warsaw, Poland.
And I'm Dr. Barbara Sundaram Manousso, Houston, Texas, and Newport, Rhode Island. And today we are excited to have part 2 with Hank Moore. And Hank Moore is a business guru. He helps corporations and all types of businesses to enhance their future and to make them more profitable and more relevant. And one of the biggest industries he's been talking about in our part 1 series is the music industry. And he's written his 14th book on pop culture, the culture of the pop music industry. And Hank, thank you so much for being here today. And you have brought to life so many personal stories. You haven't read about them. You have experienced them. You have met the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley. You have met Frank Sinatra. These are, for some of the younger audience, these are just names and images that their parents might have talked to or talked about how their romantic moments had been enhanced by the music of the background at the time. But you just brought up, as we were doing our series, about the Jackson family, because you do have quite a bit of background with them as you knew them. Also, this is a series on mediation and conflict. And of course, the music industry has its own conflicts. All life, anything that breathes is going to have a conflict. So tell us about the Jackson family and some of the issues that had been brought forth that you were privy to on a personal basis. So thank you again, Hank, for being here today.
Pleasure. In the music industry, the Jackson family is known as the corporation because they always were a corporation, because Joe Jackson, the father of Michael and all the others, had sung for R&B groups in the 1950s and got ripped off and vowed this will never happen again, and we will do this. And he negotiated a really good contract with Berry Gordy at Motown to where they had total control over their music, whereas before that, Motown had total control over all of the artists. And so it was always strategized that they would have the kind of staying power that they've had. It was always strategized that way. And so they you know, yeah, I met them at the Motown 25th anniversary concert. And that was about the time Michael Jackson, he came out and he did a medley of oldies with his brothers, the Jackson 5. And then he did his current hit songs, Beat It, and some of the others live on stage.
And having heard all of that, I want to ask you something already. There were those old days, the gold days, as also they say, and we believe that this music at that time was the one that was really sung. People had real voices, and now what we are given in the pop culture is just the artificial electronically changed voice. How is it? How does it look from your perspective? How did technology change the product and the audience?
That's a good question. Technology didn't make the music made the industry, and then the technology progressed. Whereas records then became cassette tapes and 8-track tapes and later CDs, and the sound quality got better. What happened was in the 1940s and 50s, the New York establishment controlled every aspect of music. There was very little music recorded and released outside of New York. That all changed in the 60s and 70s, and you saw hubs of recording in all kinds of genres around the country. There were studio musicians that played on these grand recordings. And then the technology shifted in the 1980s and 90s to where people could electronically create the instruments and not have to hire the musicians. And yes, it got very techno pop oriented. In the hip hop industry, this music that they're doing the rapping over is not their own music. A lot of it is stuff that's taken from music libraries, pre-recorded music. Sometimes they'll pull musical hooks and hangers out of older songs, and every once in a while they'll pay royalties. And so that's where, but you know, I can't say the music is worse now than it was then. It's good at every era for different reasons. But yes, right now there's much more techno to it than there is songwriting. And artist integrity sometimes. But I will give you a current example. Very quickly, one of the people that I presently respect in the music business is Ariana Grande. She was a child of the theater. She performed Broadway music, and she had a hit song out 3 years ago, and she was trying to avoid this turning into a lawsuit, was trying to avoid. So she put a song out called 7 Rings, and she sang it to the tune of My Favorite Things from The Sound of Music, and voluntarily turned over 90% of the royalties for that song to the estates of Rodgers and Hammerstein. So it was to try and avoid what a lot of the artists had done, which was ripped off music and caused lawsuits. And there were some very, terrible things that happened. There was a lawsuit. Pharrell Williams a few years ago was sued for lifting Marvin Gaye's song "Got to Give It Up" from the 1970s, and he lost the lawsuit. It was proven. Same thing happened with George Harrison years ago. He had a song called "My Sweet Lord," and it was the writers of a song called "He's So Fine," recorded by the Chiffons, won the lawsuit, saying that he had stolen the melody from them. So there's where, when artists like Ariana Grande are trying their hardest, if they embrace the older music, they want to give fair credit. And that's why she turned over most of the royalties to Rodgers and Hammerstein. And that also gave her a songwriting credit with Rodgers and Hammerstein, which is what she wanted her entire life.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know the song. It was very popular on the radio.
7 Rings.
Yeah, exactly. And so
My Favorite Things is still being played as a Christmas song. It was not a Christmas song. That's in chapter 9 in my book. There's a group of songs that are not really Christmas songs, but they're played as Christmas songs now.
Yeah, but her giving 90% away in royalties, it seems to me it was a good strategy, because at the end of the day, it brought a lot of attention and fame to her for people to go to her other material. And I saw her recently in a film, the film "Marry Me" with Jennifer Lopez, for example. So now she's also doing acting as well. So yeah,
she's in the movie Wicked right now. She's filming two Wicked 1 and Wicked 2 simultaneously.
No, I didn't know that.
Ariana Grande. Yeah. Okay. That's why she's not on The Voice this season.
Got it. So with regards to like the new trends where conflict might interject itself in the world of music, I appreciate your long history, but now go into the future. What happens next? Where are the new wars going to pop up? What do you think about streaming, for example? You talked about,
that's where it's going to happen.
Yeah, well, you hinted at Napster earlier when you said that the music industry was suing people for downloading music illegally. And I remember that. That wasn't a good PR move for the music industry, of course. No. But eventually they started doing the Netflix effect, where they can say, okay, this is a new way, right? People want content to be accessible instantaneously. We don't have to go buy, CDs like back in the day in the 90s. So where are we off to now with this whole new world of online streaming, where you can't own anything, which I don't like, but you have unlimited access to all music that you want for just $10 a month, $20 a month? Where do you see conflict coming up in that model?
Well, what's going to start happening is that people are going to be recording older songs and trying to get away without paying royalties. And that's one of the trends in the music industry. You're seeing people going on TikTok and they're doing fancy dances to songs, and they're not paying royalties. Radio stations for years have had a practice of paying blanket royalties to ASCAP and BMI so that they didn't run into legal problems of using songs. And what probably is going to start happening, it's got to start happening, is that, TikTok is going to have to start paying blanket royalties for things that their users are putting up. It's same principle as when you go into a restaurant and you hear all this music recorded. I have a chapter about that in the book. It's called From Music to Stimulus Progression, and it talks about how background music using well-known songs, they'll pay blanket royalties so they can have well-known songs playing on their PA system, which stimulates people to eat and drink and be happy and have a good time and come back to the restaurant. That's what that chapter is about. It's a business decision. And you're going to start seeing more and more of these websites, Spotify, Apple Music, and a lot of them are pretty good right now. I mean, some of my work product is on those websites. I've produced a bunch of radio documentaries, and one of them is on the Motown sound. They pay the royalties to Motown for exhibiting. It's the exhibitor that pays the royalties. So you're going to start seeing more and more negotiations with artists, with the exhibitors. And same thing they tried to do with the record companies and still do pretty successfully, to where royalties are more evenly distributed.
Can I just ask a question? The younger people seem to know this answer, and of course you seem to, Hank. I always thought royalties were kind of along the lines of 17 years, like a copyright, but maybe not. And the other question is, I don't know, how does streaming differ? I always wondered how people made money with some of this technology, and how it's distinguished from making money to making it open source. And I don't understand about, maybe other people listening to this don't understand where the conflict is because of the new definitions of how it's happening. And could you answer that or give us a little definition here, what streaming means, how that differs from royalties and from Spotify? This is all new to me, and I'm sure half the people
Yeah.
listening, if they're
Royalties are paid based
wondering.
on the number of clicks. It's not about the quality of the song. It's about the number of clicks. Whereas in the old days, and still, radio stations just simply pay a blanket, and there's a metric for which songs are played more than which songs. You know, I mean, as much as White Christmas still appears by many artists every season, the estate of Irving Berlin is still getting royalties on that song, which he wrote in 1941. So no, the royalty thing goes back into perpetuity.
I see.
What happens with the recording, you run into issues where royalties are not paid. Motown was notorious about not paying its musicians, its backup musicians. They were known as the Funk Brothers. They weren't known to the general public, and a lot of them had very sad lives as a result. And some would say they were ripped off. They were quiet behind the scenes people. In later years, the recording industry rewarded good talent. There was a very famous group of musicians in Los Angeles for many years called the Wrecking Crew, and they were the top team musicians. They were the kind of people that they were well paid, and they generally got the record correct on the first take. So there was an economic value to bringing in. But in today's world where individuals are making music, and, you know, let's face it, most entertainers are not doing it for the money. They're doing their careers for the music. They're slaves of the music. Most people that are performers are not very good at business. I mean, Elvis Presley was terrible at business, but he had Colonel Tom Parker to make all the negotiations for him. So that's how that happens. And he and the Colonel were often at odds about certain songs. Elvis wanted to get more edgy, and Colonel Parker wanted him to stay very commercial. That's why Elvis kept doing all those terrible movies. But anyway, as far as today is concerned, you have a lot of individuals who are getting on TikTok and getting on Spotify because they love the song they just wrote. And during the last couple of years, during COVID and the lockdown, when performances got canceled, people were going on Zoom doing free concerts. And you're still going to see that to some extent because the touring industry is about 2 years behind in recovering from COVID. You know, I know we talked about business recovery from COVID before on here, but music industry is going to be recovering from the lockdowns for another 2 to 5 years. So there's going to be a lot of creative stuff. There's going to be a lot more home concerts. And so we got to find ways, we as those who negotiate deals with artists and labels, to compensate them somehow for doing free concerts. I think you're going to find more and more opportunities for Spotify to reward performers and who will do material on their side. And you know, part of it is that very little music gets played on the radio anymore. There was a time that the playlist, what we called the top 100 Billboard songs, and we could play, and that got whittled down as the years went by. And after the 1960s, the volume of music being released was half, and it got less and less and less. And so today, there's name music is only 10% of the music that's out there. There's a lot more original creations that are going up, and a lot of people are doing free performances on their own websites and on YouTube also. I think sooner or later, the YouTubes of the world and the TikToks are going to have to start paying more royalties to performers.
And knowing what you've just said, tell us, please, there is a lot of conflict in the music industry. Definitely. There might be all sorts of conflict. There will be conflict about money, royalties. There might be conflict about the performances. There might be absolutely conflict between the performers and their agents. As I recall, for example, with Leonard Cohen from Canada, who was robbed by his agent and actually was left with nothing. And it lasted years before he realized, which made him in the 70s, made a huge, he was already 70 something, and made a very successful trip to Europe to sell his concert. Otherwise, he would have died out of just hunger because he was left with no money practically, needed to recover that from his agent. But tell us, please, what is the most popular and most desirable method of conflict resolution in the industry? We as mediators, we can see that, for example, mediation might bring the confidentiality that, to the contrary, the just regular judicial proceedings will be just publicly accessible by people. And I understand that people, for this or other reason, might want to steer between one and the other. But tell us, please, what's the most desirable way to resolve conflicts, and what's the way to you would encourage mediators to sneak into the profession and to have some good job done there to bring some peace?
The sooner that it can be done in the career of performers, that people who do mediation and good representation, there have been groups that have been ripped off. I mentioned those people in the 50s that were ripped off. There was a very famous British band called the Moody Blues in the 1960s. And after they had a major series of hits, they got ripped off, and then they took control of their own music and their own career and their own management. They drastically changed their music style later in the decade, and they came back bigger than ever. I think what the trend has become for many, many years is artist management. As I said earlier, most entertainers are not very good business people. They just want to make music, and they turn over all the decisions to agents and people that rip them off. And there's only a handful of people that are superstars in the music business that are also very, very good at business. That would include Paul McCartney. That would include Mick Jagger. Of the current people, you have Taylor Swift, who got ripped off a whole lot in her younger years. And she finally decided, and she didn't even control the rights to her own songs. That's why she's been aggressively writing and producing new material. But when she re-records her old songs, she's still got to pay royalties to the management, entities that ripped her off. So more and more entertainers are going to have to learn to manage their own careers the same way that Joe Jackson learned it.
Well, Hank, as always, wow. Such information, and everybody should know that the one gift they should find in their stocking is Pop Music Legends by the famous, fabulous Hank Moore. And Hank, how would they be able to access a dozen of your books at least to give away for their Christmas gifts?
You can just send me an email, hankmoore4218 at sbcglobal.net, and that way you can get autographed copies and you can get quantities. And a lot of people do them. And in the older books, I've got banks that are giving away my business books, and nonprofit organizations that still give away as gifts and premiums my Nonprofit Legends book, which was my second Pulitzer Prize nominee. But it's yeah, I would do that. I would take, Hank Moore 4218 at sbcglobal.net. Send me an email, and I will can get you the kind of quantity discounts that online sellers cannot.
Sure. Can they get it through Amazon?
That's another issue right there. Is when online sellers sell our books, we as authors do not get royalties. That's
like an Amazon,
and we pay them, yes.
Oh my goodness!
They don't pay blanket royalties to anybody.
Interesting.
Another subject for another day. The person selling the book gets the sale, but the author does not get any royalty.
My goodness.
There's a lot of wild, wild west stuff about the internet that has yet to be regulated. That's another subject. I am a big believer that that whole sector needs to be regulated.
Well, Hank, we look forward to hearing about that on another segment of Manousso Musing. And thank you to Mac and Natalia. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much.